Billowing tree, just chillin' in the wind. Strong wind, not strong wind. Strong wind, half wind. Change direction, strong wind, half wind, no wind. Hey, so I was working on this tree. I needed it to blow in the wind. There's all these methods of doing it, and one of them is to use flex. That works okay for things in the distance. But if you want them to look good close up, you need to do something else. So I just came up with a couple of methods to do it. It's a bit exaggerated just for this purpose. Hopefully you can use some of these methods and apply them to however you want to do yours. So I've got a simple method first. That's good enough if you don't need a wind direction, but then we'll go into the next part, which is the more advanced method, which shows you how to add some direction to the wind as well. Here's the simple way to do a tree. So I've got my tree mesh and my leaf mesh. I'll show you how to set up the simple way. We need to put bones through this tree. So what I'll do to make it easier to position the bones is I'll just create some points. So I'll go in here and create a point, and I'll just go through and I'll just position these where I want the bones to sort of branch off sections. When you're putting them on these little fork areas, you'll also need to put them on the tips. So the tip of where you want the bone to end. If I hide the tree, you can see that I've got all these points set up where the branches fork off. Fork off? That's a bit rude. So if I go over here to bones and I click on bones and start, dragging out bones, they don't really get created in a good spot. So to turn snaps on, just right click to get up settings and untick grid point and enable pivot. And now when you create bones, it'll snap to the pivot points of these points. So I can just go, snap to there, and I can go up and make a branch. So when I finish the chain, I can just right click and it'll make a little nub, and you can just delete that nub because you don't need that. So now if I try and keep branching off to go to this way, if I click on this one, it'll go to the end of the last bone, and then it starts doing this weird thing with the hierarchy, which we don't want. So I find the easiest way is to just hide those, and then you can just start from here and make a new hierarchy. Once you've created the chain, just hide them and just create a new one like this. And now you can see that we've got the bones. So if we turn the tree back on, just in a simple setup. So now because of the stupid way we created these bones, we just need to fix up the hierarchy. So if we go in here and rotate, you notice that nothing's linked in the right spot. So we just need to go in and just link those up now to where they should be. So link this one to this guy, link this one to here. So now if we just move that around, you can see that moves. This moves, yep. For this simple method, we don't need these helpers, but we'll keep them for now because we'll use them for the advanced method. Just click on the mesh, add a skin mod, just add, to select all these bones. So we go in here now, start bending these bones. You'll see that it's affecting the mesh, but it's all a bit wacky. So we'll just go in and fix those up. Make sure things are moving what they're supposed to here. Alright, so now we've got the tree ready to bend. So I'll just hide the tree mesh. And now what we'll do is, for the bones, we'll just go into here, and for rotation, we'll add a controller, and we'll chuck the noise rotation controller on it. So now, you'll notice that as soon as I added that, it went all weird. So I'll chuck a rotation list on first. So now we'll be able to use many controllers. So now it will keep its original position because it's got the Euler XYZ position controller. Now in the available slot, we'll just add a new one, and now we'll add the noise rotation. And now when we press play, you can see it just sits there, it just wobbles basically. So turn off fractal, change the frequency down a bit to something that's a bit, a bit more fun to look at. So if you enable the mesh again, now you can see that there's just this tree that's just swaying around, and it's way too strong. So we want to bring down the strength a bit to say 10, and you can see now that the tree is just doing a nice little wobble. we'll go through and add this to every bone here. So as you get towards the top, you want to go into the frequency, and you want to just increase that so that it goes a bit crazier. So see how it starts wobbling a lot more. So you can also increase the strength to say when you get to the top, just put it to 20. So now it's like really crazy up towards the top. Because they're all sharing the same seed, you just want to go through each different bone and just chuck a different seed on it, just to sort of offset it from everything else. So now that we've done this, we can just go through and adjust the noise settings on each of these bones. Set these up to be in its maximum wind strength situation, basically. Alright, so I've just gone through. I decreased the trunk one a little bit because of the trunk's not going to blow that much in the wind. So alright, so I'm imagining this is like the strongest that I'm going to use the wind for in my scene. So now that we've done this, we want to control the wind. So I'll create another point down here somewhere. I'll set it to box, and I'll just center that down to the tree. I'll call it here. I'll call it tree control. So what I want to do is create a attribute holder. Go up to animation, parameter editor, and then if we just keep this selected to the current modifier, it'll add an attribute to this modifier here. So now we just want to make sure the settings are correct. So float, yes, we want it to float. Spinner, maybe a slider might be more fun to use. We'll call it wind amount, I guess. Its effect will go from 0 to 100. So we'll just keep this range, so 0 to 100%. So I'm happy with all this. So I'll just do add, and now you can see over here we've got the wind amount controller in our tree control. So now all I have to do is link these the noise strength amount to be affected by this wind amount. And so the way to do this is to select the objects that you want to link up. So I'll just do one bone for now. So I want these two objects because I want this controller to affect this bone's noise. So once I've selected both of these, you can go into animation, wire parameters, parameter wire dialog. And now if you just select this update or refresh on both sides, it'll only put the objects that you've selected in, so it'll make things easier to find. So now all I want to do is in the tree control, I want to expand that, modified object, find the attribute holder. So now I've got the attribute holder here. Custom attributes, I want the wind amount. So we've set up the wind amount in here, and I want that to affect bone 1. And the transform, we've added the rotation list. We need to find, so instead of affecting the noise itself, we're going to adjust the weight of this noise effect on the bone. So if we go down to weights, we can see that we've got our first controller here, and we've got our second controller. And these are both, by default, when you add a new controller, these are both set to 100% affecting. So if I set the wind amount to affect the weight of the noise, and so all we do is basically select the wind amount here, select the noise, do a one-way control. So this means if we click this one, it means this wind amount will go over this way to affect noise control or noise rotation. So I'll just click that. Then if I do connect, now I'll play it. So this bone here is now, the wind's not doing anything, because if I go into the attribute holder, you can see that the wind amount's set to 0. So now if I slide it up, you can see that it sets it to 100%. Although it doesn't quite look right. So you can see the weights. So we've got the oiler weights are 100%, and we've got the noise rotation weight is actually a lot more than we want. It's actually like 1500. So if I go into here and adjust the control and I divide it by 100, so now it'll take the wind amount, divide it by 100, and that'll equal the noise rotation percentage. So now if I update that, yeah, you can see now, so it's 15%. So if I play now, you can see it's got only 15% of an effect. If I go up to 100%, it's 100% affected. Now we just have to go through and do the same effect for all these other bones. Now if we press play, nothing happens. Oh, press play, nothing happens. But if I adjust the wind amount to strength, it's all going nuts like it should in the wind. And you can adjust the wind like this. So you can go 50%, go down to a little bit, just a little bit of wind. And then lots of wind. Alright, so I've just gone through and adjusted some settings to my liking. So now it's just a nice little subtle sway. And then obviously I can increase max wind strength. So now it's like going crazy in the wind. Now we'll add some leaves to it. But first what we need to do is we need to select where the leaves will show up on the tree. I'm going to do it with material IDs, so I'm just going to select the tree, turn off skin, go back into edible poly, click yes, and then if I go to the face select, I can go down here to set ID. I can just go through and basically I can select all the places that I want the leaves to show up, set ID, and I'll just click on this and I'll give it some strange number like maybe 8. Turn skin back on. So now what we can do is we can add a TyFlow. So here we'll create a birth for our leaves, set it to stop at 0 and 0, so it only shows up once. Go to position object, select our tree, go to location, and now we'll do faces. And we can go down here to density by material ID, so I can click this. Now I can set it to 8 because that was what we selected before, and now it's going to show up where our material ID was different to number 8. I'll go over here to display, set it to geometry, the shape, click the leaf, and then go add selected. Then go to this 3D tetra of the original one and just remove that. So now I've got the instance leaf on the tree. We can just go in here, set the rotation. We'll use normals to control that. We'll change this to facing closest. If we go down here to objects, we pick the tree again. So if we choose surface align, so we do surface align, then we'll pick the tree as the surface. I'm going to adjust the divergence to like 180. I'll restrict that to an axis, so maybe just give all these like a little bit of divergence each, and now we'll adjust the amount. So maybe we'll pick 2000. So now if we press play, we've got our crazy wind. Our leaves aren't actually staying on the tree itself. So what we need to do is we need to go back into TyFlow. After we've rotated the surface how we like, we need to bind this shape to the tree. So we'll add a bind there. Then I'll pick the tree object, and we'll change this, instead of object, we'll change it to surface. So now the every leaf is going to stick to the skin mesh of the tree. So now when we play, you can see now that it follows the skin tree really nicely. So now it's just a matter of getting these leaves to react with the wind just like the tree does. So we can add a wobble effect. So if we chuck this wobble effect down here, and then we want to affect the wobble of the leaves by a force, so we'll just drag a force out here into another event, wire the wobble into this force. I don't know if it's easy for you to see, but see these little white dots? It puts those as like a single line that will act like an effector. So we want to put those that point at the tip of the leaves. Go into the wobble and adjust the scale. You can see these dots will now move out. They basically act like little springs. Put it to where the tip of the leaves are. So now if we play the simulation, not much is happening. because the wobble stiffness is quite big. So we'll just reduce that to like 0.1. And now you can see that the leaves are they're sort of wobbling a little bit dynamically if you turn the wind strength all the way up. You know, the leaves aren't going crazy like they should in strong winds. So what we do is go back into TyFlow, and in the force we can just it's got built-in forces, so we can enable the wind strength if we want. But what we'll do is we'll enable the noise. So we can just quickly click on 1, and now we've got some turbulence going on. Alright, so I've just adjusted the settings a little bit, so now you can see that the leaves are going pretty crazy like they would. The reason I call this the simple way is because all you can do is basically animate no wind to strong wind, and there's no wind direction. But anyway, that's the simple method, so we'll move on to the crazy method, which is basically the same as this, but we can actually control the direction of the wind. So the way to add some direction to it, we're going to use these points that we made before. So we're going to use these points to control the wind direction. So what we can do is we can just make a hierarchy of these points the same way the bones would be. These two end things link to this one, this links to this, etc. Alright, so I've just linked them up, and we'll just do a little test. So grab the bottom point, move it around, and you see it just moves the same way the bones are linked up. Our bones will still be using the same wind control method. We're using this wind amount, so we can just we'll turn this down for now. So we need a way to control the wind direction. So what we'll do is, for these points, we'll give it a controller. Come up here to assign controllers, and for the position, we can just go into add a spring controller. And if you play it, I'll scrub the timeline, nothing happens initially. But what the spring controller does, it acts like an invisible spring between these two. You can see, watch this one here, watch this as it stops. See how it does a little wobble? And if I just go into the spring settings and make it heavier, say 1,000, now it's more obvious. The good thing about springs is you can add a force. If we go into create a wind force, go into the spring controller and go down into this forces tab, we can add the force. So now when I press play, you'll see it gets pushed back a little bit because the wind strength is set to 1. Alright, so I've just gone through and added all the spring controls, and so now when we press play you can see that they all move with the wind. And what we can do now is we can adjust the tension of the springs so that the ones at the top can be affected more by the wind. So if we just go into, say, this top one here, and when we change the influence of the springs, you have to make sure you click this first, otherwise it won't change these two settings. So with the tension, we can just reduce that to, say, let's just try 0.1. And now when we press play, so you can see now it's being affected more by the wind. So we can go down the hierarchy so that the next one will be affected a little bit less. So we'll change this one to, say, I don't know, 0.2, and now we'll see how that sort of behaves. And yeah, so you see how it makes it's going to make that little nice little curve. So we'll just go through and change all those. So I've changed those, so now if I press play, you can see that it's got that fall off, like it's getting blown, it's leaning over like the wind. But you notice when I first press play, look at this first one, this control the trunk, see how much it wobbles? And we don't want the trunk to wobble that much. So for the spring, we can actually go into increase this, the dampening. We'll just turn it up to, say, maybe 2, and now we'll see that it doesn't wobble. It gets affected by the wind, so it gets pushed in a direction. And another thing too, we might just increase the tension to say 4, and now see it doesn't. It's sort of like, it's not as wobbly. It still gets affected, so it still bends, but because this part of the trunk's going to be very, very thick, we don't want it to wobble as much. So we can go through to these and just adjust those settings to our liking as well. All right, so now we want to make our bones follow these points. So the way we'll do that is we'll just go click on our bones, and we will. For its rotation, we'll still have its rotation list for the old method, so we'll just go to where the noise rotation was, and we'll just change this to a look-at constraint. And then if we go down to the actual constraint itself, we'll change the look-at target to the point above it, and we'll just go through and do that for now. Alright, so I've gone through and added those, so now if we press play now, actually the bones won't do anything because we just overwrote the previous controller. We're still getting affected by the wind amount, so we turn the wind amount up. Now we'll see the effect happening. So now instead of the wind amount adjusting the noise controller, we're adjusting the look-at controller. So we can either keep this to 100%, or we can just delete this whole wind controller altogether, because we don't actually need that controller anymore. Alright, so just like we did before with the rotation for the bones, we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to apply that to each of these points. We just go into the rotation here, and we can just directly add a noise rotation to it. So now it's just like before, we've got the shake going on. So we can just turn everything down to similar settings that we had before. So we can just go through to each of these points, add this noise rotation control to every point except for the tips. Actually, when we do the bass, instead of adding it directly to a single rotation controller, we should add a list, because we still want to be able to control which way the tree is rotated. So we use that with the first oiler controller, and then we'll add a noise on top of that. Okay, so now I've added all the noise controllers. So now all the points are doing random noise rotation. You notice the reason I didn't do the tips is because of the way the springs are set up. You can see that this point here is rotating pretty crazily, but these points don't really rotate based on that because of the dampening and the way the springs work, because they're so, the tension isn't very strong at all. So what we'll use for these tips is we'll use it instead of a noise rotation, we'll actually go in here, and for the position, we'll actually change that to a position list. And what that'll do is we'll keep our spring controller in the first slot, and then for the available one, we'll add a noise position as opposed to a noise rotation. And now that will give us the crazy wobble for the tips. So if we play this now, it's just, it's a little bit crazy, so just adjust that the same way you did for the noise rotation. Let's go through all the tips and do that for this one. And when you're adding these, don't forget to adjust the seed so that they're a little bit different to one another. Alright, so I just added the position controllers. So now shakes around all crazily like this. So now if we unhide the tree, we can see that it will deform like it's in strong wind. But there's some problems like down here. See how the tree's swaying back and forth? And that shouldn't happen. So if we move this around, see how it sort of it angles to face what it's looking at? And we don't want that to happen. We want it to bend but not turn to face the direction it's going. So the way to do that is if you click on the bone, go into the rotation, the lookout constraint, and if you go down here to the aligned up node axis, see it's set to Z, which means that's up. So it doesn't care, as long as it looks up, it doesn't care what way it faces. But if we switch that to X, so that now it's facing along the X axis, now if we move this point around, notice how it still faces up, or it stays in the same alignment, but it bends in the direction. But obviously, by changing that, we've rotated the entire bone structure and the entire mesh. So we just change this back to Z, and now before we change anything with the bones, and in skin modifier, we just want to turn the skin modifier off, and then go down to the advanced parameters and untick always deform. So that means that now when we change the bones or the rig, it's not going to change the skinning properties. And now if we go back into the bone, change it to X, it's flipped now, but the mesh hasn't flipped. So we can just go through each of these bones and change it all to X. Alright, so I've gone through and changed those alignments. So now if we go back to the tree, and before we turn skin back on, you want to do the always deform checkbox first, then just do it again. And now when we play it, you can see now that doesn't do any of the weird bending that it was doing before. What the fuck am I up to? So now that we can adjust the direction of the wind with the wind force, we just need to go back and we need to control the amount of turbulence that we get. We can just do what we did before. Because we've already got this wind controller down here that controls the direction, it's got controls in here, we may as well just wire the turbulence up to the wind strength, so we only have to animate one controller for the whole thing. So we'll just do what we did before. We'll pick one of these controllers and then the wind. Then if we go into the wiring dialog, we can choose the wind strength, then we can go into the point, go into the noise rotation. Where the fuck is it? What the fuck is going on here? Where the bloody thing's supposed to be in here? I fucked it up. We can't actually directly link this to the strength because it's a 0.3 instead of just a 0 to 100%. So because we've only got one rotation, we don't have a weight amount in here that we can control. So if we just go back to our point and just click on here and just add a rotation list. So now we've added the list, we've kept our noise rotation, but now if we expand this, you can see now we've got our rotation weight. So now if we do a one-way connection, we don't have to do divided by 100 anymore because the wind controller doesn't go from 0 to 100, it goes from 0 to 1. So now if we just go connect, and then we can control the strength of this noise by the wind strength. So if we set the wind strength to 0, now this noise amount will be 0. And then if we set the wind strength to 1, it will now be 100%. So we can just go through and do that to all these controllers, except when you get to these end points for the tips, obviously you're going to have to find the noise position, not the noise rotation. Hello, tell me more, this will get in the fight. Tell me more, something is well. Alright, so now I've gone through and I've wired all those parameters so that the wind amount affects all these points. So now if I press play, nothing happens until I increase the wind strength. So as I start to increase the wind strength, it starts to get crazier. So it goes in the direction we want, and it also starts adding this turbulence that we want as well. So we want the tree to probably, when we got this much low wind, probably want the tree to shake a bit like this, but up here it's probably going a little bit too much. So we just want to go in to change the frequency of these. So I'll just go through and change everything now. Did you get a fight? Alright, so I've gone through and adjusted things, so now if I play it, we've got a nice sort of idle wind here at like 10% wind. But sometimes you might want a different scenario where you want the wind to be not very strong, but you want the tree sway to sway a bit more. So because we've tied everything into the wind strength, we need to make another controller that can sway the tree. So what we'll do is we'll just go to the base of the tree, the base point of the tree, and then we'll add another controller in the list. Basically, just another noise controller. So noise rotation, and now this will wobble the entire tree. So we just have to decrease the frequency a bit until we've got like a nice sort of sway. And here we go, this is a nice one. So maybe increase it even more. So it just sways back and forth. Maybe set the strength a bit higher as well, so we've got more control. And now what we'll do is we'll wire this control up to another point. So we'll just create another point down here, make it a box, make it a little bigger, and we'll just call this like the tree root. So now in here we can do what we did before, just add another attribute holder. Call it maybe sway override. And now we can wire that up. So we want our sway override to our new noise rotation. And remember, we have to do the divided by 100 to get the 100% effect. And we connect those. And now when we play our idle animation, we just have our little idle animation. We can introduce sway with this little slider here. So now we can have, subtle wind, but we have a little bit more sway. And we can also increase add the wind strength, and this will also include the sway as well. But now, so we want to get the leaves to show up. So if we just unhide our TyFlow, the leaves are all still connected like they were before. So if we just play this, you can see that the leaves will still react how they should. But if we remove the wind and play it now, they're still acting like they did before, so we still have to animate them independently, which is fine, but it just adds an extra step. So what we can do is we can go into TyFlow in the wobble force. What we can do, instead of using the built-in turbulence layer, we can pick an external force. So we'll just pick the one that we've actually made. So now when we play it, you'll see nothing's happening because there's no wind. And if we increase the wind, so to 1, now the leaves will react with our wind force. With the strongest wind setting, you can see that leaves don't really shake around that much. So we can just go into the TyFlow settings, and we can just maybe reduce the stiffness a little bit more, and also the decay, maybe just reduce that to something low as well. And now if we go to the maximum strength of wind, you can see that leaves act a lot more like they're blowing in the wind. Could probably do it with a little bit more turbulence as well, but it'd be really handy to wire that up to the wind strength. But for now, we can't do that in TyFlow, but hopefully sometime in the future we can. Once you've created this tree, you might want to use this multiple times in your scene, so you might clone everything, and you might also want to reposition it. So we can just link the bone, maybe the bone and this point, we'll link that to this new tree root that we made. So now we can move the tree anywhere we want, but when we try and rotate the tree, you notice how it sort of does this weird twisting, and the tree doesn't actually rotate properly, and that's all to do with the bone up node. So at the moment, if we go into the bone, this bone, and we have a look at our up node, you can see that it's using the world, which works for now, but the world doesn't know. If we start rotating, the world doesn't know that we're rotating, so we want to actually pick a new up node. So the best way to do that is to just pick the one that it's closest to at the origin. So for this example, we've got this point, this base point down the bottom. So we can just untick world, go to the select picker and choose this little point down the bottom. And now, when I rotate the main root, you notice that the tree rotates around with it. So we just have to go through and do that for the rest of the bones. So for this bone, this point will be its up node.
Tommy kangaroo down, sport. Tommy kangaroo down, sport.
Alright, so I've just gone through and added all those up nodes. So now when we rotate the tree, you can see that everything works fine. And now the last thing we need to do is, obviously when we move this tree around, we want the wind to follow that, so we can just simply link the wind to the tree root. But now if we rotate the tree, the wind changes direction, but we might want to rotate the tree independently of the wind direction. So we can just go into the wind, and we can, in the link info, we can just untick rotate, and now when we rotate the tree, the wind direction will stay the same, and we can move, change the wind direction independently. So that's pretty much it for a tree blowing in the wind.
Thanks for watching Stu's video. Have a nice day.
Yes.
Bye.
Well, she said, thanks, bye.